Hey guys, it's Frankie, Simply Imaginary People, and this is just a tutorial on how to convert clothing meshes to different body meshes. So, mainly you can use this for adult male to child and toddler, or child to toddler, or toddler to child, or toddler or child to adult male. Adult females are a bit more difficult because they have breasts and kids don't. So, you pretty much have to edit out the breasts, which is possible but can kind of mess up the mesh. Also works for adult female to teen female, adult female between the Bobby and the EA mesh. So all you're going to do is you're going to go to create new project in TSRW and just import whatever mesh you want to do. So I'm going to do an adult male mesh to kids or toddlers. That would be a joke, mise à pied. I told her that anything she said now would pop up in the tutorial. Anyway, so I just opened one of Skunk's meshes, and what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to export the mesh as .object. Just make a new folder, just called Skunk. Okay, so export the object mesh. And I am also going to export the multiplier. Oops, sorry, my screen has issues. Right, export the multiplier. Awesome. Now I can go into Blender and just import that mesh. And try and find it. Okay. I like to press 5 and then 1 on my numpad to get this nice front view. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click it, go to edit mode, press A to unselect it all, and then I'm just going to hover over the EA body part, so the arms, and press L. And you'll see it just selects the arms. So I'm just going to press L on that, L on the, oops, that was the wrong one, L on the back of the neck, and L on the front of the neck. And there's no body parts inside. Again, I'm just going to press delete. Right, might have some random bits floating around, just going to delete those as well. Right, and now I'm going to import general meshes. Let's do this for child. A child mesh. So now I've got the child body, and I've just got to fit this on there. So I'm just going to scale it down, obviously. Move it down. Maybe scale it up a bit. And I usually try and get the neckline around about right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Cycles Render. Actually, I'm going to Blender Render and just turn on the lighting, and then go to Cycles Render. I'm going to right click on the body. I'm going to say go to Materials, Add Material, New. Click here, click, not Magic Texture, Image, and open the image. And then go to materials here. And what you'll see is that I now see the image on the body, and this shows me how much of the UV I need to cover. So I need to make sure I can't see any of the multiplier on the body so that the multiplier doesn't show in game. Just going to go back to here and go back to edit mode. Right, maybe make it a bit bigger. Move it down. Okay, now I've kind of got it working. There we go. I just tried to keep the area around the neck. And now it literally just becomes, I'm just going to go back to solid mode because I find it easier to see. It just becomes a game of how to get all these parts into the correct place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on sync mode so I can see my UV here. And I am going to select the bottom half of an arm, and I'm going to press O on my keyboard to turn on proportional editing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the bottom part of the mesh that I don't want to move at the moment, and in the 3D window I'm going to press H, and that hides it. And now I'm going to select the bottom part of the arm, here, and I'm going to press G, and then I'm going to scroll upwards just to change the scale of this circle, because that's the proportional editing circle. And I'm just going to move and scale this sleeve a bit, and it seems rotate it a bit like this. And I'm going to try and move it the least amount in any way possible, just because the more you move it, the more you stretch the textures. Little tiny clippings, don't worry about it, just so it's in the general position of the arm. Now I'm going to do exactly the same for the other arm. The more you stretch a mesh, obviously the more you stretch the texture of the mesh, so just keep that in mind when you're working. Okay, and now I'm just going to do exactly the same here. Really trying to do as little as possible, because it's just not a good idea to edit it so much. Okay. Can leave that, and now I can press Alt and H and it will unhide the previous mesh. And now I can just move this bit forward, because it's kind of clipping as much of the front as it is in the back. Okay, and now I can just do some little editings of areas that I don't like. So what is this? Okay, that's the top of here. Just going to move this down because it looks kind of like a bulky shoulder. Okay, now what I can do is I can go into sculpt mode. Now, a couple of things in sculpt mode break seams. I'll just show you what I mean. So you can see is a seam line between two parts of the mesh, and if I use, for example, smooth, and I paste over it, it opens up my seam. So I can't use that one. The ones I usually use are the sculpt raw one and the grab one. So I'm just going to take grab for now. And what I can do with grab is I can just literally grab and pull little areas out. So little clippings like this, I can just grab and pull so that they no longer clip. These little tiny parts. For bigger bits like this area, I'm going to go to sculpt and then make sure it's on add, and then down strength and up the radius of it. And you'll see it just literally pulls it outwards. I'm just going to go to unlock the symmetry mode. And just paint a bit so that it fills the gap. Here we go. Now obviously everything I'm doing is editing, also the way the verts are placed, which edits the texture, which is a bit annoying. But that's something you can't help if you want to do it the quick way. Obviously the best way to convert a mesh is to go back into MD, make it again on the correct body mesh. Something I can grab, just if it wants me to, pull it out. And just finish the sleeves here. Now I'm doing this pretty fast. Usually I would probably spend a bit more time trying to make this look a bit neater. And it's also something that's easier to just grab and pull out. Kind of like that. Then obviously I can scale down puffier areas. Right, for good bone assignment, it's good to have the arm bits closer to the armpits. Makes bone assignments easier. I'm just going to move those bits up a bit. And then just go to edit mode and see. You can see there's a big bit clipping out of here. Geez, press O to turn off proportional editing. Push that up again. Alright. Get rid of these spikes here. Okay, now I just created a gap because I moved two verts on a seam line independently. So what I can do is I can go onto this magnet tool here and set this to vertex, and when I press G to move it, it'll snap to that vertex and properly close up the hole. Right, so once I've done that, the first thing I need to go is go back to material and make sure I am covering the entire multiply area. So I can't see any grey of the multiplier on the arms, so that's good. And now what I like to do is I like to go to the top, add image, open, general images, and add my UV checker map, and just make sure it still looks relatively square. Now theoretically, the more you smooth or pull at stuff, obviously the more you're going to pull the texture apart, especially if you say it did have boobs and you're really trying to convert from adult female. You can use the smooth tool, even though it breaks seams, you can use it like in areas where there aren't many seams. You just might have to fix the seams with the magnet tool afterwards, so make sure you pull all the verts to meet the other vert again. And let's just say like I drag this up here. You can see that the texture is super stretched. Now what I can do, I can go to edit mode, I can select that area, or the whole area, but I usually like to do it as single areas. I can go to UV minimize stretch and just scroll my bar, and you can see it tries to move the UV so it kind of fits the shape of the mesh. I'm just going to undo that, and also undo that. And I can do this and just go to UV minimize stretch, and it'll just, in a way, try and cancel out the movements I did. Now obviously I also then need to load the multiply image just to make sure I didn't pull the texture too far, but that looks okay. It's always going to look a bit weird around the shoulders and stuff, just depending on how the mesh was in the first place. It's never going to be perfect, but of course you can spend as much time as you want resculpting this, even though I do say try not to do it too much, just to avoid stretching the texture too far. But yeah. Right. The last thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete this EA body, and I'm going to import a child body, which I already have, that has pants under it, because I obviously want this top to fit over pants, and if it doesn't, that sucks. So this is my child body with pants, you can see, and you can see that my mesh doesn't fit over it. So I'm just going to go back to sculpt mode, I'm going to go back to add mode, or grab mode, whichever one you feel like working with, and I'm just going to paint over it until I can see that it fits over my pant mesh, which if you've made clothes before you should have as an MD avatar anyway. Otherwise you can't use this top over pants in game, which would suck. Okay, now I've made a top, it fits over pants, and I can delete the body and I can export this as .object and then continue on as if I were making clothing, so add a body. But the first thing I would do is, I've got these wonderful seam lines here that I don't want, so I'm going to go to edit mode, and I'm going to select with L all the front facing parts. So, and none of this solid part, which if the creator has edge split their mesh properly, you should be able to just hover over the parts you need. It's better to go on edit, select, and press L. So all the parts that belong to the original mesh that aren't solidified parts, I'm going to select like this. And then say P parent by selection. And then I'm going to go to object mode, press A so that I have both the inner and the outer parts selected. Say export to object, selection only, unticked objects is object objects, and click object as object groups, and export that. And then in Marvelous Designer, I can import what I just exported. Downloads. Nope. Delete the materials. And select the outward facing group, and you can see these wonderful seam lines here in the 3D window, and just go to Edit, Vertex Align Normals. There we go, got rid of those seams. Now I can also do the same for the other group if I want to, just not both of them at the same time, because otherwise we'll get grey shadow. Say Align Normals to smooth out these rims. Regroup them, add the body, and assign bones, morphs, whatever. Just keep going as if you just made your own outfit. You've got all the textures already, so you don't need to do anything textures. Just add the body, add morphs and bones, fix all that, and then import that and the rest of the textures that you can export from the original, so the clothing specular and the mask and everything. Just export all that and import it into a new project. So that is pretty much how you convert an object. Just check. How you convert clothing to a new body mesh, or scale it down, scale it up. This is also how I convert my clothes most of the time. Sometimes you've got the problem that something like when I scale from toddler to child, my multiplier, it doesn't in this case, but let's just say let's just say when I added the picture of the multiplier from this, and I went to material, let me just hide these, you can see the multiplier goes down to like this length. And let's just say the sleeves were a lot shorter, so let's just pretend that the multiplier came down to here, which would be annoying, which often happens if you scale up from toddler to kids, just because toddlers have stumpier arms, but the same UV map as the kids. So often you have to lengthen the sleeves. So there's two ways to do this. Either you make the sleeves longer and stretch the texture, which makes the texture and consequently any patterns you put on it stretched, or you re-UV map. So what I could do is say, okay, it's covering more of the arms. I'm just going to do this backwards so I can show you what I mean. Okay. Okay, just pretend the sleeves were only this long. And I'm thinking, okay, shit, I can see this texture here, what am I going to do? So the first thing I could do was I could go to Blender Render, delete the texture on this. I could bake myself a new body so I can see where everything goes. So just ambient occlusion 2. Oh. Okay, now I can see that the sleeve can only go up to here, and so when I go to this, I can see, okay, it goes too long. So what I could do is I could, oops, nope, that wasn't the image I wanted. Select the area that's too long, and I could rescale it. Obviously, I scale the same other sleeve the same size. Or I could move it down here instead of scaling it, so I could edit the UV map to fit the clothing how I want it. This is usually the smarter way, but it also means that you need to edit the texture. So obviously the multiplier would no longer fit because the multiplier arm bit needs to be moved down here. So what I would do is I would select all of this and say UV, export UV layout. I would export that as a UV layout, open it over the original multiplier, and then move the part of the multiplier, rescale it to fit my new UV, and then just continue on. So that would be way one of doing it. The smarter way just takes a bit more effort because you have to edit the texture. The other way would be pretty much backwards to what I just did. So let's go back to Cycles Render. For sleeves, what you can do is you can select the bottom of the sleeves. Don't select like this arm bit that's attached to the next body part, unless it's not attached to the next body part. Like, try not to hit seams, so try not to get the, see, that's already too far, to get the verts that are right along seam lines where it's sewed to another body part, because if you move them, it might move away from the seam. So for this side of the arm, what you're going to do is you can press R for rotate, and then you're going to type in -45, and you'll see it moves like this. And then you can press S for scale and Z, and that'll make it only go taller and shorter. So I can make it taller, and then I can say R45, so it was -45, then you'd rotate it back to this angle, because the arms are exactly a 45-degree angle, and then I can move it down a bit. So theoretically this will stretch the texture, because obviously you stretched it longer, but it can then cover the multiplier, and yeah, you've got a bit of a stretched texture on the sleeves, but depending how far and how much you have to stretch it depends on how bad it ends up being. So that's the other method of doing it. So just to remember, delete the adult male body underneath, then scale it around about the right size, and then use the sculpt tools to make sure nothing's clipping. Make sure for tops it fits over pants, or for pants it fits under tops. So if it's pants, I would go to sculpt mode, I would go to the sculpt raw, and I would use subtract to make it push it under the top that I use as a reference, and for tops I would add to pull it over the pants. And then make sure it fits over the multiplier properly, and then separate the front-facing verts from the back-facing verts by pressing a P to parent them as a group, so that's what I did. Export it, align normals, and then continue on as if you were doing your own mesh. And that is pretty much the way that you can convert most things. Some things obviously don't convert very well. Toddler and kids clothes to adult female is a nightmare, because women have a curvy body and breasts, so also adult females down to kids or something, their textures will also have shadows where the breasts are, which you would have to edit out. But anything from like male to kids to toddlers, or between body meshes for the same age groups, pretty much works like this. So yeah, I hope that at least gave people a short idea. It's not a very long tutorial. I didn't explain all the other steps, because I'm hoping that if you're attempting to do this, then you know a little bit about making clothes. Oh look, there's an issue. Fixed. Right.